Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is RJ Kraus, and I'm here with Kurt Badenhausen. And we are very excited to talk with you all about the power of athletes. We're going to go through a lot of social data, a lot of endorsement and salary data, and show the impact, influence, and power that athletes bring to sport. My name is RJ Kraus. I am one of the co-founders at Hookit and currently head of sponsorship intelligence at Core, and I'll be taking you through a lot of the social aspect of this presentation. And I'd like to turn over to my colleague here, Kurt.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kurt Bodenhausen. I'm a sports business reporter at Sportico, where I've been for about 2.5 years after 22 years at Forbes. And I've been following the money behind sports for even beyond that. So I'm super pumped for this, and I'm excited to dive into the data, RJ.
Yeah, likewise, and very excited to have Kurt on board here. We've worked with Kurt for a long time, probably 5 or 6 years now, right, Kurt? As kind of mixed our data sets and saw some of the interesting insights and correlations that come out of it. So before I dive into some of the data, I'll give you a little background on Core and on Hookit. Like I mentioned, Hookit's was in business for about 20 years. I'm co-founder there. Core acquired Hookit in 2022. On the Hookit side, we were really focused on measurement, really trying to understand what kind of exposure brands get, specifically through social media. And historically, Core has been working on the management side, helping rights holders and brands to manage their sponsorship data and sponsorships. And so we joined forces to build a single platform that combined both management and measurement, and ultimately to help brands optimize their spend. So interesting things to come on that, but just a little background for you there. At Core, we are about 200 folks that are experts in the space of sponsorship, partnership, activation, measurement, data, and we track nearly every athlete, team, league, brand, event, venue, influencer in sport. We track about 500,000 various entities in sport on both the social side as well as in the spend side. We're tracking about $5 billion annually in global sponsorship spend and about $10 billion annually in brand value that comes out of social media. We work with some of the best brands and rights holders in the world, and we help them both to really optimize their relationships and their partnerships. And so we're going to talk a lot about social today. And so, first things first, wanted to talk about why. Why do we focus so heavily on social media, right? If you look at where fans are engaging with sport these days, even if they're watching a broadcast, they're on their phone and they're tracking on social. So social is really where people are engaging and consuming with sport. And the nice thing about social media is that there's a lot of data. So we have access to a large depth of data, from engagement to audience, demographics, content analysis, that can be used for a lot of different purposes. So you can pull out some really interesting insights. And not only that, we're tracking everything in the same way, so we're able to benchmark things really easily. And then lastly, it's nearly real time. So brands, rights holders are able to actually make changes and tweaks on the fly, versus getting broadcast TV data back months later. We can, within a day, look at how a post is performing and understand how the fan base is engaging and make tweaks based on that. And because of all these things, marketers are really focused on social media. I'm not going to read this, but the motivation for us to do this, and we've generated a lot of content leading up to this, and we will continue after this. Everyone after this presentation will actually have a nice lead behind that has a lot more detail in it than what we're about to go through. But teams obviously create legacy and community around sport. Leagues, they're the organizers that make it happen, but athletes is where that human connection happens. And so we really like to focus on what athletes are doing and what they can do to elevate sport, and that's what we're going to run through today. Again, today I'll get a look at the data perspective, the footprint that athletes have globally, and the influence that they have. We're going to look at earnings, and from a salary and an endorsement perspective. and see how that correlates to the value that they're driving in social media. And then we're going to leave you with some insights and best practices, as well as some detail on some of the best in the biz. So to kick it off, just looking at the total footprint and impact of athletes in the sport. We looked at 45,000 athletes that have been active in social media in the last year, to give you a sense of what share of voice athletes drive in the world of sport, right? So 22 billion followers. Obviously, this is not unique. This is cumulative across all athletes. That accounts for 68% of the total followers of the sport. So when you look at the followers of teams, leagues, events, venues, plus athletes, have 68% share of that. So the majority of the audience around sport is actually following an athlete. Athletes are not typically content machines like teams and leagues are. So this is, makes a lot of sense that they're not posting as much content, right? They only account for about less than a quarter of the content. When you look at the amount of engagement and video viewership that they drive, it's an outsized ratio, right? So 22% of the posts drive 33% of the engagement, 25% of the video views. So a lot of what fans are seeing out there and what they're engaging with is coming from the athletes. And we have some more detail for you on this. So how does that break out by sport? So we have a look at engagement as well as posts and audience. But just to give you one example, and this is typical on all the charts that you'll see in the view behind. But global football, soccer has the majority share of engagement and views. In this case, we're looking at those 127 billion video views. 42% of it come from global football athletes. 9% come from basketball athletes. 7% come from cricket. So this is an interesting stat here, is that nearly as much video viewership comes from cricket athletes, but there is about a tenth the number of athletes out there that we're tracking compared to basketball. So cricket is actually driving much higher engagement and video viewership per post than any other sport, actually. When we talk about the footprint, right, it's very obvious that athletes have a big portion of that, but athletes also drive massive impact on the clubs they play for, right? So when you look at some of the more recent big moves to maybe some smaller clubs, we can see what that influence actually means to the clubs themselves, right? So when Tom Brady moved to the Bucks, he nearly doubled their fan base almost immediately. When Ronaldo moved to the Saudi League, Al Nassr had about 1 million followers before he came over, and the time since that announcement happened, they've gained nearly 20 million followers. And more recently, obviously, with Messi in the news of him coming to MLS, this is really new. But even in just the last 6 to 8 weeks, he's Inter Miami has grown by 19 million followers as a result of Messi coming over. So huge impact these athletes have on the social side, but they also have a ton of impact on the value of the club. Kurt, you want to give us some insight?
Yeah, certainly. The Messi thing's incredible. I mean, 1 million followers, I think, on Instagram before rumors started that he was coming, and now I think 13, 14 million, fourth biggest in all of North American sports, behind 3 basketball teams, which is incredible for an MLS club. But tracking team finances for 25 years at Forbes and Sportico, we've seen this phenomenon really, particularly in basketball, drives a lot of it. And you could follow LeBron James' career, the immediate impact he had on the finances of the Cavaliers. And then you saw once he went to Miami, where the valuation was stagnant as other teams increased in value, because the revenue base really plummeted after he left. And one player can have such a big impact in the NBA in terms of driving on-court performance with only 5 players on the court. Much harder in the NFL or MLB. Tom Brady, one of the few exceptions. For the most part, the NFL they all operate at such a high level. And I was talking to Kevin Demoff on Friday for a story, who runs the Los Angeles Rams, and I was asking about winning the Super Bowl, what it meant for their business, and he was like, it was good. Business was pretty good before we won the Super Bowl, having just opened a stadium. But Brady was a unique situation because the Bucs, before Brady arrived, they were one of the few NFL teams that was really struggling financially, having a lot of trouble drawing fans to the building. Brady shows up. It's the hottest ticket in town. Sponsors want to get on board with the team, and they won. Went a Super Bowl, and so that helps a smaller market club like Tampa. But again, talking to Jorge Mas a couple times over the last 2 months or over the last year, I've talked to him about Messi coming to Inter Miami and what that would mean for their business. And they're talking about revenue doubling for the club. He thinks the valuation of the club is going to double too with Messi on board. But they have a really exciting project going right now with opening a new stadium and then a tremendous mixed-use development around the stadium. So they are really on the rise and going to be one of the premier MLS franchises once that new development opens.
Absolutely. I think it'd be interesting to see his impact on the sport as a whole, especially in the U.S., right? I think there's going to be a lot higher fan growth. I think similar to what F1 probably saw after the Netflix show, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why you saw league partners willing to kick in with Apple and Adidas, because they see the ability to grow this whole league is good for them. Apple's locked into a long-term partnership with MLS, and it's in their best interest for the league to grow.
Absolutely. And one thing to note to the audience out there, if you have any questions or comments even, we will be looking at those throughout the presentation, and we'll potentially discuss them in line with this presentation. So don't hold back. Definitely, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, throw them in there. All right, so when you look at athletes, right, they have obviously a massive footprint in the world of social and sport. They can drive massive value and impact the value of the clubs that they play for, even the sports they play for. But they obviously also drive a lot of value for brands. That's one of the things that we really focus on, and one of the things that we've worked with Kurt on is looking at what kind of value is being generated, what kind of exposure is being generated by not just athletes, but all of sport for brands. And so we won't go into it in this presentation, but as a lead behind, you'll see our valuation model, how it works, how we're equating the value that you're getting from organic content to what you might spend on an ad. And so when we look at that athlete footprint from a value perspective, 34,000 athletes promoted at least one brand. It's about 76% of the athletes that are active in social media over the last year. The 72% of a brand's value drivers are athletes. So the majority of, not necessarily value, but the majority of partners out there are athletes. Those 34,000 athletes, they promoted 4,000 brands over the last year, and that drove nearly $2 billion in our valuation metric, adjusted ad value. So it's basically an ad equivalent dollar value downweighted for quality of exposure. So if you have a smaller logo or not as clear, text promotion, those things kind of downweight the value. But $1.8 billion in brand value from nearly 2 million social posts. And almost half of that goes to just 20 brands. And you could probably guess who those, at least the top three are. But yeah, a lot of value being generated here, and specifically for these brands. So as you can imagine, the top three, sports apparel brands are getting line share of that. The logo is kind of everywhere, especially the swoosh. But they're generating massive value. When you look at the value being created here by brand, you can also see, or by athletes, you can also see what percentage of that total value actually comes from athletes. So about a quarter on average of the value for a brand comes from their athlete partnerships, and there's a couple that are outsized, right? So Red Bull, huge athlete roster. They create their own events, so they don't have as many event partnerships, but you know, over a third of their value comes from their athlete partners. And then when you look at Louis Vuitton here, Louis Vuitton is actually on the list this year because of an amazing campaign that they did during the World Cup with Ronaldo and Messi. Massive pickup in exposure, and that generated the lion's share of this value, and hence you can see also the lion's share of the value coming from the athletes, and specifically those two athletes. And as a lead behind here, obviously you can kind of see which athletes are driving that value for brands. Kurt, do you see something similar when you're looking at brand value that's coming out of the work that you do?
Yeah, 100%. The Louis Vuitton one blows my mind. I can't imagine they were in the top 100 last year. But that one campaign, you enlist the two biggest athletes and most famous athletes on the planet to do a campaign together. That drives value, I imagine.
Yeah.
We see this 100% when we're looking at on the athlete side. Listen, Nike, Adidas, in particular, they commit multi-billion dollars a year to promote their brands, and that money's being funneled to teams, athletes, as well as leagues. And Nike, I mean, Nike's business is incredible. For anyone who watched the movie Air, and back then, before Michael Jordan showed up, it was a business $800 million in revenue. Revenues were on their way down. It was losing money. They just reported their year-end results. It's a $50 billion business now in terms of annual revenue. Jordan brand alone is a $6+ billion business, grew 29% last year. It's incredible what these brands are able to do. And you see it on the athlete side, particularly in global soccer and basketball, because they focus so much on those, because those athletes resonate globally, and they want to compete. Nike and Adidas and Puma, they certainly want to compete on a global basis. Nike and Adidas in particular have both been very aggressive in China to try to capture mind share as well as market share there. And if you have somebody like Lionel Messi or Ronaldo or LeBron James, basketball and global soccer, those are two sports really resonate in China.
Yeah, absolutely. And energy drinks, obviously, they spend a lot of money specifically with athletes. And then Baiji, just like to call out here, right, is that they're focusing a lot on cricket in the Asian markets, and driving a ton of value as a result of that.
Really, it's soccer. It goes back to that theme of global football. You see it through here, the partnerships with the sportswear brands, but then the jersey partners, the stadium partners with Emirates and Qatar Airlines. It's incredible the global reach that these athletes have.
Yeah, it's only going to get bigger. That soccer in this country is definitely on its way up, especially now with Messi. All right, so went through the influence, the impact, how that impact makes its way to clubs and to brands. But now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of a lot of Kurt's work, which is how are these athletes making money, and what sports is that being distributed to? So, Kurt, you want to take us through this?
Sure. Well, as you can see, again, we have basketball and soccer at the top of the chart, and the blue box, you see the value to endorsements in terms of social media. Again, huge footprint that these global superstars have in soccer, driving so much value. But it's interesting when we think about the correlation between on-field or on-court earnings plus what people drive off the court. There's a handful of things that go into it. Certainly the sport that you play is really important. You see that magnified here, where really hard for a baseball player to break through. This is last year's data. This year would look a little bit different because Shohei Ohtani is the rare baseball player that actually has broken through. Doing this for almost 30 years. The top earning baseball player off the field before Ohtani was Derek Jeter, who at his peak was making maybe $8-9 million a year. Ohtani is now pulling down more than $35 million off the field because he's just one of these kind of unicorns that has moved beyond baseball and is closer to Steph Curry or Messi or Ronaldo, just because of his unique situation. But you think about basketball, you win a championship, you win an MVP. It leads to endorsement riches, but it's not always a perfect correlation like that. Guys have to want to do this. And so certainly Steph Curry and LeBron, they're very active partner. They look at the brands they work with very much as a partnership, and they're very active in what they do, and they promote on their social channels and do everything they need to do to expand those businesses. But there's athletes that in reality, they're not that interested in it. Just the Denver Nuggets are the world champions, and their superstar, two-time MVP, Mr. Jokic, he makes $2 million a year, roughly, in endorsements. He's from Serbia. He's just not really interested in promoting himself. And the reality is, it takes a level of self-promotion to want to do this. In contrast, you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, also European player, won a championship. MVP of the league, and from Greece, incredible story. And with his agents at Octagon, he's embraced this story, and he's worked with his endorsement partners. Disney made a movie out of his life story, and he's got a really fun online a social personality, and it has been incredible for his bank account. Nike has gotten way behind him, putting out his own signature shoe. And he's earning in the neighborhood of $40 million a year. So it's certainly, when we think about off-field earnings, off-court earnings, basketball, the elite stars in basketball and soccer are off by themselves. Football, these guys are getting paid a ton of money on the field, obviously, by looking at the top 15 here. But there's really very few that break through and do big off-field stuff outside of a handful of quarterbacks, really. And then the individual sports, you see a real clear correlation here. Golf, tennis, these athletes have been they're walking billboards, whether they're on the golf course or on the tennis court. And the demographics, as people know, of the fan bases of both those sports is fantastic. So that makes them very attractive to marketers.
Yeah.
RJ, what stands out here for you?
Well, actually, I was just going to say, I thought it was interesting. We were talking yesterday about some of the athletes that weren't interested when they were in the prime of their career, weren't necessarily interested in the business side of it, but have recently, really gotten behind the commercial side. You talked about Brady and how, not that he's not in the prime or Messi's not in their prime, but they're definitely doing a lot more deals now than they ever did.
100%. Brady was turned down 25 deals for everyone he accepted, and Peyton Manning was the one who was doing commercials, and the guy you saw every time you tuned in to an NFL broadcast. And Ronaldo and Messi were such a contrast. Ronaldo, from an early point, embraced the idea of marketing himself and pushing the brands that he was working with. And Messi, for years, turned down so many deals, and he was just focused on the field. All he wanted, all the folks to be on soccer. And yes, Adidas came along for the ride and used him in their promotional activities, because he's one of the, either number one or 1A best player in the world in the biggest sport in the world for a long time. But in recent years, Messi and his marketing team have certainly embraced the idea of working with partners, and the Instagram followings by those two guys. They got to be closing in on, or probably past 1 billion Instagram followers combined at this point. They're really, it's a social media phenomenon.
The weight that the two of those athletes carry is massive. And then you add in Mbappe and Neymar into the mix, and like the top 5, global football athletes are probably accounting for the majority of this right here. So a lot of
it's an interesting, just the money in these sports is getting so large that, talking to player agents, they a lot of times, they'd love for their clients to be doing more. But if they're playing baseball and making $35 million a year, or the same for football, and to kind of go chase a deal that might be for $50,000 or $100,000, when these sports are a grind. I mean, particularly baseball and football. I mean, there is no downtime. I mean, you are just going. They're both really long seasons, and so people value their time off, and there's a trade-off. With every deal comes a time commitment, and so if you're not at the very top of the food chain in terms of athletes and can command 7-figure deals, we're seeing people turn it down because they're making so much money as the revenues have grown and salary caps have gone up with them. You have more people making $25, $30, $35 million than ever before.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think we'll have a couple of insights and takeaways from that fact for sure on some strategies brands can employ. Cool, and then when you get into, you touched on it, right? But you get into certain sports and salary caps and salary versus endorsements, and you look at those two charging against each other. Some interesting things come out of it.
Yeah, the football one stands out to me because you've got all these guys who are maybe the best offensive lineman or best defensive end in the sport. That is incredibly valuable to your team. And you might pay that person $25 million a year. But to the general audience, they're with a helmet on, never sees their face up close. They're never doing a touchdown celebration. Most people wouldn't be able to pick them out, if you put two people in front of them and ask which one was the best offensive tackle in football. So their off-field earnings can be very limited, but on-field, with the money exploding in the NFL and the salary cap going up and up, you see the earnings going higher and higher. And then those three guys you mentioned, Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo, it's fitting that they're all clumped together because they all get paid very, very well. The three highest paid soccer players before Ronaldo's moved to Saudi Arabia, the three highest soccer players in the world were Neymar, Messi, and Mbappe. And incredibly, all played for the same team, which is part of the reason PSG
salary caps there. Yeah,
no salary caps in European football, which is why PSG lost $400 million with those three suiting up. So it's a different business model.
Yeah,
with
it's interesting too the differences among sports. Right, you mentioned athletes wearing helmets and the fans maybe not being able to engage as much with them. You look at golf as well, right? And majority of earning is on the endorsement side, right? Everyone sees their face very close up if they're doing well for quite a long time. Interesting though that on the social side, golfers are not as engaged, right? They don't put in nearly as much effort as some of the other sports in terms of social and how much posts they put out there and how much they engage with fan base. So a lot of different dynamics at play.
Yeah, that's interesting with golf, and yeah, you don't think of big social media breakout viral moments
Right.
in golf, and part of it is, I guess, social media requires a certain, putting yourself out there, and particularly if you want to build something, and golf traditionally has been a more reserved sport. Live trying to change that model,
sure.
not be a little louder on social media, certainly. But I also see the tennis stars jump out here because Roger Federer and Serena Williams, just unbelievable careers, and brands recognize that. Listen, I might not see another Grand Slam, and now both of them are retired. But in recent years, brands have recognized that, listen, they might not play a lot, and they're probably not going to win a Grand Slam, but partnerships with them are invaluable because they resonate, and they're so aspirational to so many people that they will both have incredible opportunities in their post-playing careers just because of the resume that they've had on the court.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so if we take this and look at the top 10 earners in 2022, right? So this is mid 21 to mid 22. Look at the top athletes here. Can you give us some insights on this?
Yeah, we wanted to look at it this way instead of the most recent data gets a little funky with the money from Saudi Arabia, how it's impacted both on the soccer side, skewed salaries a little bit, and then also on the golf side, handing out $100 million plus bonuses. So this is pre-live money and pre Saudi Soccer League splashing cash around all over the place, but gives you a better picture in terms of how things have looked for the most part for the last decade or so, where basketball players, soccer players are such big brands. And the shoe contracts drive a lot of that. Nike, Adidas, these guys, again, the top stars, they're getting $20-30 million as part of their shoe deal. A really big shoe deal in Major League Baseball, $500,000. You have a couple people making over $1 million, but those deals are really far and few between. And the same is with the NFL. The fact of the matter is that the baseball cleat market, the football cleat market is not very big, and with the soccer and global football stars, with the basketball stars and the global football stars, you certainly there is a halo effect that goes beyond just the soccer cleat and the basketball shoe into other apparel that these brands are selling. So again, that's why you see, and the salaries too in the NBA have just absolutely exploded. League is on fire. So the salaries are all really big. You see the three PSG guys make the cut. Oh no, not Mbappe. Sorry, this is through the middle of last year before he signed his big deal. Yep. So Ronaldo's tucked in there, but Mbappe is on the current list because he's getting paid over $100 million a year now from PSG. And then Federer, Federer and Woods, the old guard, who they are just really resonate with so many people in their respective sports. And again, I mentioned before, the demographics in both sports, fan demographics are so strong, and both stars. Fans have such an affinity for both stars, and Tiger's had his ups and downs, but there is still a core golf audience that lives and breathes by Tiger Woods, and you see it in the ratings at any point over the last few, the rare times of the last few years where he hasn't been in contention. He's money in the bank for any sort of golf business.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting you say that, right? Like these are the athletes with the star power, right? And when you look at the social brand value, this value is actually from their own channels, not necessarily earned, right? So a lot of these athletes don't actually post a whole lot. Tiger does not post really on social very often, but once we add in, and add this to the leave behind, but once we add in the earned aspect to what they're driving value-wise, it's a much different story. Right? If you look at Tiger, nearly 100% of the value he drives to his brand partners is from what we call earned media, right? So when Golf Channel or ESPN talk about a post a video of Tiger, and there's Nike coverage, Nike's getting a ton of value out of that. It's not necessarily something Tiger posted, but it's because Tiger's Tiger. And so there's, if you looked at that, this would be a totally different story for him. But call out here is Ronaldo. Like you mentioned, his savvy on the business side has been there for quite some time, and he was really leading the charge in social until recently, when Messi started to kind of pick up his game on that side of things, right? But just, we had to make a break in it just because it's like off the charts how much value he's driving for his brand partners. But interestingly, like we were looking at 2021 to 22. If you look at 2023, actually Messi, the value has flipped. So Messi's driving a lot more value for his brand partners now, and as a result of World Cup, he gained 50 million followers in the weeks around World Cup, which is insane. I mean, there's only actually 40 global football players, soccer players globally that have that audience total, and he gained that in a couple of weeks. So their star power is just immense still.
Speaks to the power of the World Cup as well. Winning the World Cup is good for business. What I just want to mention, in addition to the social brand value, you think about, which is great for these companies, but a lot of these companies, particularly with Nike and Adidas, I mean, they're building businesses around these athletes. Nike has a lifetime contract with LeBron James. His shoes sell hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Steph Curry, has a deep relationship with Under Armour, and that they just extend that. That's a lifetime deal. They want to build a multi-decade business. Listen, talked about Air before. That is the model. That is what all these companies are hoping to catch fire with. It's hard. I'm not sure there is ever going to be another situation where we have an athlete and brand come together to create something like that, where it's a $6 billion brand with on the back of an athlete. But if you can capture 20% of that with some sort of lifetime situation, and that's certainly what Under Armour is hoping to do with Steph Curry, to continue to build with him, and LeBron with Nike, the same thing, or Kevin Durant with Nike.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's I mean, good on Nike for identifying those athletes early as well. So I think that's part of the equation, right? Is trying to identify those that you can grow with. All right, so switching gears a bit, we're going to get into all the things that we just kind of talked about, some analysis. How do you turn that into actionable insights, right? And so we talked a lot about picking the winning combo. There's some athletes that might be high performers on field, earning a huge salary, but just they're not interested in driving brand value, right? And so endorsement and salary are not always correlated, right? But when you're going out and identifying athletes to work with, look at those athletes that are actually out there wanting to promote and talk to and build a relationship with brand, in addition to those that are performing. Number two, right, like personality, and like I said, desire to promote. Those are key. Making sure that your brand aligns with that, with the values of the athlete. That's where you get that compound effect of the beauty of a Jordan and a Nike together, or LeBron and Nike, where they mesh perfectly and they're in it for the long term. And then how do you do that? Like I just mentioned, it's identifying. And the nice thing about social media data, and having more data at our fingertips than ever before, not just social media, but performance data, you can actually identify some diamonds in the rough before other brands do. And with the data that's available, understand how they align with your brand, and make the right choices early on to invest for long term with who you can build your brand with. You mentioned Under Armour and Steph, right? Like that's been a long in the making, right?
I mean, talk about dropping the ball. I mean, Nike, Under Armour signed him before the Warriors became the Warriors, before Steph became Steph, and as the story goes, the Nike guy comes into the room and says, Stephen Curry, we'd like to, do business with you. He was a Nike guy when he came into the league, and they're like, Stephen Curry, and away he went. So it's funny, those little moments in time can flip something. But I listen. Under Armour gave him a great deal back then. That was probably they recognize what you're talking about. He was not Steph Curry then. He was not the MVP. He was not four-time champion. I think they're up to. And they bet on the right guy. And it's done. The Curry brand. They built a basketball business where they really didn't have a basketball business before that. So it's been a good comment.
A lot of this is research. I'm sure a lot of it's luck. Also, kind of putting chips on a couple different bets doesn't hurt either.
Well, that's what Nike does. Nike just puts his chips on everybody. They got the biggest bankroll, and so often you find. So when Victor Wembanyama shows up, well, of course Nike did a partnership with him, a few years ago, thinking, maybe this 7 foot plus 15-year-old will pan out and be in the NBA. So Victor does not have a big shoe deal right now with Nike, but I'm sure Nike will figure out a way to redo that deal at some point to commiserate the energy and excitement he's bringing to the NBA and the San Antonio Spurs this season.
Absolutely. So one thing that we actually have coming out here soon, actually, I think it's available now, is our Athletes Guide to Social. So it's free for anyone. You can share it with your athletes, but working with your athletes, and Nike actually does an amazing job of this as well. Working with and empowering your athletes to put themselves out there on social or otherwise will kind of, it's the rising tide that lifts all boats. They grow their fan base. That gives them longevity. The brands get value out of it. So there's just a selection of a couple of the tips that we have in the guide that we help athletes with. We do summits with brands, and we'll sit down with a group of athletes and kind of walk them through the simple things you can do. It doesn't take a ton of effort to do a better job in social and to engage your fans, right? So one of those things is just, you don't have to be a data scientist, but adopt the data mindset, right? Like, look at metrics. You don't have to dig deep into it, but look at what works, what doesn't. What do your fans like, right? And double down on the things that are working to build a more engaged fan base, right? Engage with your audience, right? Don't just make it a one-way street. The best athletes that are doing the best job, and there's a lot of athletes that aren't necessarily at the top of the game on the field, or they're up and coming, but they're doing an amazing job on social, and that drives a ton of value for them, for brands, right? Engaging with your audience, showing them you're a real person, goes a long way. Some really simple things too, right? A lot of athletes will just post once and kind of shoot it everywhere, but posting natively on each platform and using each platform for what it's good at is really important. A lot of athletes are, these days, younger athletes, really focused on TikTok, Instagram, but Twitter, even though it doesn't drive as much engagement, that's where a lot of writers are. That's where a lot of journalists are spending their time, right? I'm gonna back me up on that one, but
yes, we think the whole world lives on Twitter, but I can tell you, journalists live on Twitter.
Yeah.
So I come home sometimes and be like, "Wait, you didn't see this? It was through my Twitter feed,
on Twitter
continuously."
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot going on there. We've not noticed any drop in activity. So, that's one example of a platform that an athlete may have not thought about because there's not a lot of value generation there. But, if you want to get that earned media, if you want to get exposure to the Kurt's of the world, then that's a good place to go.
I don't know how valuable I am.
Hey, one of your stories, Trev.
It is a large megaphone still.
Yeah.
100%.
But yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit, but like showing your personality, you talked about a little bit, right? Is fans engage with personalities, fans engage with, people that are doing well on the field, but also those that they're interested in off the field. And so I'd say most athletes have a solid personality. And so if you do, show it. And that'll drive a lot more engagement. And then lastly, and this is an obvious one for most, but we see this time and time again where athletes will just blast every sponsor they have in every post they have and just dilute that promotion. It just feels very much like an ad. And so what we talk about is we have a metric called promotion quality, where we look at 100% quality. Basically, this thing looks like an ad, and essentially is an ad, right? 0% quality is hardly noticeable. And so we try to find a sweet spot, because as promotion quality goes up, engagement tends to go down. People don't engage with ads, right? And so there's a sweet spot there of making the promotion with your brand partners feel as integrated and as genuine as possible. So we kind of talk through that. But some things here that you can kind of take to your athletes, and like I said, Mike is really great at this, is empowering your athletes and really helping them, guide them to build a bigger fan base, like for their own benefit, for the athlete's benefit. And it goes without saying, but creating engaging content drives a lot of engagement and builds a fan base, right? And so, as a brand, right, look at what athletes are naturally interested in posting and talking about, and try to find a way to integrate your brand into that, right? Short vertical video is what all the platforms are driving right now, with Reel, with TikTok, with YouTube Shorts, right? It's the medium that everyone is focused on, and so getting good at creating that content and integrating your brand into that content is key. Athletes are, it's natural for them, right? Holding a phone, take a video, very easy, right? Fans actually engage more with raw content versus fully edited content, right? Anything that's behind the scenes that shows the personality. There's some examples here of how, athletes, John Morant is, engaging with a fan, right? Images or video of the players' kids and how they're interacting with them before a game, right? Lando Norris, smacking Carlos Sainz in the butt, like that kind of stuff. People love to see that, right? Anything that they can't get on the broadcast of the game or the race, anything behind the scenes, right? Dinner with friends, Otani, like that kind of stuff drives so much crazy engagement because the fans feel like they're a part of the athlete's life. Any shows of talent, right? Whether this, Steph video is real or not, I am not the one to debate that. But the fact that he sunk 5 full court shots and show of talent there, any kind of like crazy feats of talent or skill, like this guy jumping off of a crazy thing into a small pool. Any kind of content like that drives some of the engagement. And then, as your athletes are posting this kind of natural content that's in line with their personality and what they're into, make sure that the brand is promoted organically and not just a logo kind of slapped on. And then lastly, just compound exposure when you sponsor both the athlete and the club. This kind of goes without saying, but Kurt, we've done a bunch of collaborations in the past where we showed the fact that like Ronaldo drove just as much value for Adidas as Nike when he was on Man U and other Adidas clubs, and likewise with Messi driving value for Nike when he was an Adidas athlete. So when you look at like an Mbappe that's sponsored by Nike on a Nike club, there's compound exposure that comes with that.
Nike club for now. We'll see. We'll see.
Right, and easier said than done, obviously, but I know that was always an interesting thing when we were kind of digging into data to show how much value an athlete could actually have for their competitor to their sponsor. And then, I know we only have about 9 minutes. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, post it, and we're happy to go through it. But we're going to go through this pretty quickly. There's high-level view of the top athletes and the top content, and we have a lot more to show you, a lot more detail by sport, women versus men, by league, to dig into which athletes are really driving, moving the needle, that you'll get in the league behind. But a couple quick hits. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but in the top 4 by engagement over the last 365 days. Some of these names are to be expected, right? Ronaldo, Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe. Some of them, we kept in some retired players, and obviously the news with Dion, and we also kept in some influencers around the space that maybe are retired but also still active in social media. And so it's interesting when you see kind of the athletes that rise to the top, right? There's some that just are riding away with some big news. There's others that are just performing. Carlos, right? Like having a mega year right now, and seeing the results in the social audience and engagement that's happening. When you look at like motorsport, right? Top 4 motorsport athletes are all F1, somewhat to be expected. But you notice that Max Verstappen's not on the list anywhere there, right? Dominating the sport. But again, one of those athletes is probably not as focused on social media presence, whereas Lewis Hamilton, been in the game for a long time, very commercially savvy, and so he's driving a lot of engagement there. And some college athletes too, right? Obviously, Otani, you talked about kind of the magic of him, but Dalton Chandler, a college athlete, and a couple others throughout here. So college athletes and NIL are getting into the mix and driving a ton of engagement as well, right alongside their pro counterparts. Who's driving the most value? Again, no surprises here. We talked about Messi kind of overtaking Ronaldo. So in 2023 alone, right, we're looking at Messi driving a lot more value than Ronaldo. But global football, again, dominating the top 10, with the exception of cricket, right? Throughout Kohli is driving a ton of engagement, a ton of value, and some e-sport as well. On the female side, similar, top athlete, Alicia, soccer player, but a lot more spread in terms of sport, a lot more individual sports that you're seeing here, and a lot of action sports. On the female side, there's a lot of interest on the action sports side, a lot of really good content creators on that side. We dig into the top most valuable posts. We talked about the Louis Vuitton campaign, right? These were the 2 top posts of the year in terms of brand value. And that this thing got massive coverage, and it skyrocketed Louis Vuitton up to 8th in the rankings, from well over 100. But then you look at we talked about crazy content, right? Fabio Widmer, who is a mountain biker, does some crazy stuff on BMX and mountain bikes. Red Bull athlete, but he's riding over a bridge on his bike, and 56 million video views later, Insta360, relatively small company, is getting a ton of value. And then again, like Neymar, global football, any content they post, but anything that's like shows their personality, which this video does. 245 million plays on that video, nearly $4 million in value for people. So interesting to see the content that rises to the top. And then, additionally with social, it's great that you can see those rising stars as well. So I'm not going to go through to these names, but we'll have this as leave behind. But you can really quickly and easily dig into the social data to see who's rising the charts in terms of follower growth, engagement growth, and then seeing how that correlates to on-field performance, which it does sometimes, but not always. And that's it. Like I said, ran through the ranking stuff pretty quick, but everyone will have that in the takeaway. Any parting words, Kurt?
No, it was great. I mean, it just you see it throughout, particularly on the men's side, the power of global football, and certainly more diversity on the women's side, which presents some opportunities. But I think about creating these viral moments, and you brought up Red Bull. I mean, on that last slide, and they've been they're master marketers before they got into sports and through action sports, but now they're using their promotional activities certainly through F1, obviously, and then also getting involved in global soccer with the soccer clubs they own, and so it's been interesting to watch a traditional marketing company get into operating sports teams, and they've had a ton of success, obviously, operating as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they're a brand that's always been focused on the athletes. So even though they own the clubs, like they're still a name really focused on generating content with their athletes, which is great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll give you all a couple minutes back, but appreciate your time. And yeah, like I said, follow up with any questions you have for Kurt or myself, and we'll give you a nice leave behind tomorrow. We'll get that sent out. Thanks all.
Thank you.